Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're doing another video to help you improve your chess game. I know I sound a little bit like a broken record, but in order to be a better chess player, you have to play better moves. There's only a few ways that you can really improve yourself to play better moves. One is to improve your knowledge. A lot of people think the paradigm is just improve knowledge. To do that, you study openings, you study what we call exact endgames, you learn principles, which gives you knowledge. You study tactical patterns, which gives you pattern recognition, which is knowledge. And knowledge is a very, very important part of the game, but it's not the whole game. If you just improve your knowledge, there's only so much you can do to get better. So let's talk about what some of the other ways are to get better. And we've talked about these in other videos. You can improve your skills that are directly involved with finding moves. Those are your analysis skills and your evaluation skills. Your analysis skills would be things like, if I go here and he goes there and I go there, what's going to happen? And within your analysis skills, you have skills like visualization. If you can't see what you're doing, if you look ahead and you say, that gets blurry to me, you can't play what you don't see. So improving your visualization will improve your analysis skills. What's an evaluation skill? An evaluation skill is who stands better, how much, and why when you get to nodes in your analysis tree. So for instance, suppose you look at the Joko piano here. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop c5, bishop c4, bishop c5, castle, knight f6, knight g5, castle, knight takes f7, rook takes f7, bishop takes, king takes. And I ask you to evaluate this position. And all you know is the Reinfeld values, that rooks are 5, pawns are 1, knights are 3, and bishops are 3. And you just traded a knight and a bishop for white for a rook and a pawn, and you say, well, that's 3 and 3, traded for 5 and 1. That's 6 for 6. But black's king is a little bit exposed, but black has more pieces out. White's castled. 6 for 6. Well, what's the tie break here? Well, black's king is a little in danger, but he has more pieces out, so maybe black's a little better. That's an evaluation, but is that evaluation correct? Well, to show you how much it would take to improve your skills, let's ask Stockfish to analyze this position. Let's see here, analysis. Whoops, guess I better make the page a little bigger here so I can see this. Sorry about that. Let's reestablish the size of the page for you. Okay, we'll bring that back up. All right, Mr. Stockfish. It's white's turn. What's the evaluation of the position? We thought maybe black was a little better if that was our evaluation using Reinfeld numbers. Well, that's completely wrong. Look at this number over here. Black is ahead by minus 3.07. Well, normally it takes about one pawn to be winning the game, and more than one is usually winning, and winning by more than 1 3/4 or so is winning pretty easily. So the right evaluation of this position is black is winning easily, up 3 pawns. So if your evaluation skills told you the game was almost even, your evaluation skills are letting you down. Part of the problem is that the Reinfeld numbers aren't very accurate. The Reinfeld numbers 1, 3, 3, 5, 9 are all integerized, and integerized numbers aren't very accurate. So you end up with a kind of a skewed value on what the position is here when you only use the Reinfeld numbers. Okay, so you can improve your analysis skills, you can improve your evaluation skills, you can improve your time management. There's 2 parts to time management, and you want to do both of them really well. The first part is what I call macro time management. That's where you try to pace yourself so you use almost all your time for the game. You want to, if you're playing a game like this, which we're looking at, which is a 130 game, 100 minutes with a 30-second increment, when you finish the game, you want to have almost 0 minutes left on your clock. Not exactly 0, because then your clock falls and you lose, but almost 0. That means you're trying the best you can, but you don't want to play so slow that you get into unnecessary time trouble. If you do, then you're going to have to play a bunch of fast moves at the end, and that's almost undoubtedly going to be disastrous. So people who play too slow are almost as bad, or if not worse, than people who play too fast. So you want to make sure your macro time management is just right, the Goldilocks principle. The other issue is, where do you allocate time for your moves? For instance, in a 130 game, if we look at 40 moves into 100 is 2.5. plus 30 seconds is a half. That's 3 minutes a move. Well, do you want to spend exactly 3 minutes on every move? No, you want to play your book moves instantly and give yourself more time for later moves. And you want to look at the board and do what we call criticality assessment. And you want to take more time on your critical moves than you do on your non-critical moves. So, and I have a bunch of videos on criticality. You can look at those. I did one a few weeks ago called The Most Important Strategic Decisions, which involve critical moves that are not necessarily the ones that are the most complicated. Complicated moves are almost always critical. So you want to improve your time management skills, so you allocate time to the right moves and you use almost all your time. You want to play slow games and learn how to pace yourself. One of the things that I've talked about recently with some of my students is consistency. Consistency is a skill. It's really important. A lot of my students say, oh, well, I did all the right stuff for, 23 moves in a row, and then I got sloppy and I forgot to check whether my opponent had checks, captures, or threats on the next move, and then he made a threat that I couldn't meet, and I just lost the game. Well, that's a question of consistency. It's a question of thought process. You want to have the right thought process, but even if you have the right thought process and you don't do it consistently and you only do it correct 90% of the time, 90% sounds like a high number, but it's actually not very good. If there's 40 moves in a game and you only do it right 90% of the time, then there's 4 moves of the game where you're forgetting to do something important, like look for whether or not you can meet threats on the next move. And if you do that 4 times in a game, the amount of rating points you would be lower than someone who didn't do that is amazing. I always ask the question to my students, suppose someone's 1800 and we clone him, and the clone knows everything that he knows, and there's only one difference. The clone has a defect where twice a game he kind of plays the first move he sees without really thinking about it much. If the regular guy is rated 1800, what would the defective clone be rated? And most people guess around 1400. Well, that's if you make 2 randomly bad moves a game. Imagine if you made 4 randomly bad moves a game. That would be even worse. So sometimes you hear people say, well, I'm 1400, I'm just as good as that 1800. Well, it's possible that they're telling the truth with one big exception. They might be just as good as that 1800 on 35 out of the 40 moves of the game, but on the other 5 moves of the game, they're not as good as the 1800 because they're not consistent and they're not trying their best on every move, and the 1800 is. And then they sit there going, oh, I know this, I know that, he's no good, I can keep up with him. And then all of a sudden, boom, they lose the game because they're not consistent. So there's lots of ways to get better. There's knowledge. There's improving your skills like analysis and evaluation. There's improving your time management. And there's improving your consistency. But you don't want to just work on one thing like your knowledge. You have to work on everything, your thought process, your time management. You want to work on your skills. If you just work on knowledge, there's only so much you can get. I have a chess tip of the day on Twitter at Dan Heisman, and I was talking about these kind of things, and someone said to me, Dan, I've been following you on Twitter, and all I've done in chess is study knowledge. I've gained opening knowledge, endgame knowledge, tactical pattern recognition, and I've got myself up to 1500, and I figured I would just keep doing that, and eventually I'd get to be a really good player. And now I begin to realize from following what you're saying is that I actually have to learn how to analyze positions. Okay, so I thought in today's video, for the rest of the video, we would take this game between Wang Hao and Giri that was played at the Candidates Tournament, and we kind of talk about what some of these skills are. So in the opening, obviously, the 2 grandmasters have a tremendous amount of knowledge. They're going to be blitzing off their book moves, and you could tell when they're done when all of a sudden the clock starts to drop. They'll make all their moves in like less than 30 seconds, and then all of a sudden they'll think for 20 minutes on a move. That's their knowledge coming into play, and a lot of that knowledge these days comes from computer analysis and database analysis. So let's take a look at the opening. Wang Hao plays the English. Lots of ways to defend the English. Giri plays symmetric English. All right, so I know here that the 2 main moves are knight c3 and g3, but you can also play knight f3. You could also play e3. That's my knowledge at work. I've studied the English, and I know the grandmasters are 93% of the time, if not more, they're going to play one of those 4 moves, probably more like 98% of the time. So let's see which one Wang Hao plays. He plays knight c3. Okay, so what could black play? Well, black could play knight c6. He can play knight f6. He can play g6, or he could play e6. Those would be the main four moves here. And again, we're using my knowledge. What did he actually play? g6. Notice he took almost no time. That's because he's prepared for the game and he knows, okay, if somebody plays the English against me, I'm going to play symmetric English. All right, so again, white has the possibility of playing g3, knight f3, or e3. Those are the big three. And he plays g3. All right, when people play g6, 98% of the time on the next move, they play bishop to g7 right away. I don't see any reason why Geary's not going to do that. If you outsmart yourself and start playing other moves other than bishop g7, you could actually get into a little trouble. So I would play bishop g7 right away here. Bishop g7. And ditto for white. He's going to play bishop g2 right away. He's not going to fool around and say, well, maybe I should play d3 first or something. Just, if you're going to fianchetto, unless your opponent is bishop takes c3 a threat. No, it's not, thanks for the bishop pair. Of course, bishop g2 played right away. All right, so black again has lots of choices. He can play knight c6. He can play knight f6. He can play e6. He could, in some lines, play d5, d6, but I don't see too many grandmasters playing d6 here. Let's see what he played. Knight c6. All right, so white has to decide how he's going to play this. If he wants to play a Botvinnik system, he's going to play e4 and knight ge2. If he wants to play for d4, then he's going to play knight f3 and then play a later d4. If he wants to play e3 and then d4 with knight e2 to keep control of the d5 square, then he's going to play e3 here. Those are the main things that he could do. At some point, he could play rook b1 and then a3 and b4, but I don't think he would do it this early. Knight f3. All right, so black has to decide. If he plays knight f6, then white can play d4 either here or on the next move after he castles. If black wants to maintain control over d4, he can play the Fischer variation with e6 and knight ge7. The idea of that is to not get the knight in the way and keep control over the d4 square. That's actually a pretty popular line, so I wouldn't be surprised if Geary doesn't play e6 here. And he does. Okay, so again, we're talking about knowledge. This is all knowledge. I don't have to figure out what I've been telling you. And people say, oh, Dan, but knowledge is so important. If I don't know these things, I can get in trouble. And the answer is, yes, absolutely. Knowledge is very important. But at some point, we're going to get out of the book, either out of my book or Wang Hao's book or Geary's book or all of our books. And then the rest of the game is going to be pretty much not knowledge. Okay, so here white would normally castle. He plays the strange move h4. All right, well, I don't know that line that well. I guess he's trying to take advantage of the fact that black's going to play knight e7 so he can play h5. So now I'm out of my book. And Wang Hao took a little bit of time on that move. He took a couple minutes. Did he take Geary out of his book? Well, we could tell by looking at Geary's clock. Now, be aware, the clocks we're looking at are not the real clocks. I'm looking at the game as relayed to the Internet Chess Club and not as where it was played originally. So the clock here could be off if the relayer didn't get the move in time or whatever. So let's see how much time Geary took to make this move. He played h6 pretty much immediately, so he must be familiar with the h4 idea. Okay, so he plays h6. And white could still castle kingside, or he could wait and play d3. He could play e3 and d4. I don't think he would... Once he plays h4, it doesn't make sense to play e3 and d4. I'd be very surprised if Wang Hao does that. d4, sacking the pawn right away. Okay, it looks like black has 3 on that pawn, and white only has 2. But what's going to happen is if black takes the pawn with the pawn, white's going to play knight to b5 and hit it again and also threaten the check. And if black takes it with the knight, he could take it first with the knight, and if pawn takes, then play knight b5. And if he takes it with the bishop, he loses the bishop pair, and he's weak on the dark squares. So this is actually a very sharp line by Wang Hao. Okay, and by the way, what I just told you about what happens on pawn takes and knight takes and bishop takes, I've seen this kind of sacrificial idea before in the English. So again, we're working on my knowledge. Even though I'm not familiar with this idea in the h4, h6 line, I'm aware of the idea in general of what he's trying to do, even though it looks like that's not a safe move. So black takes with the pawn. Well, there's no doubt White's going to play knight to b5. There's really no other move. If black then plays queen a5 check, he has the option of playing either bishop d2 or simply playing king f1. There it is, knight b5. Now black has to worry about this d6 square. He could guard the d6 square by pushing up his pawn to d6 to let the queen guard that square. That's one way to do it, and then white would take the pawn back. Black says, I'm going to go up 2 and let my queen guard that square. Okay, so now if white takes the pawn, black can take this pawn. So it's getting a little more complicated. And now this is where we're starting to lose the knowledge and starting to pick up the, the analysis skills. So here, if I don't know what I'm doing here, I'm going to take some time. If I'm Wang Hao and I've never seen that move, which he probably has, he has a lot more knowledge than I have, I'm going to figure out, what do I want to do here? Well, clearly if I play c takes d5, he can't play queen takes d5 because of knight c7 check, winning the queen. But if he takes back the pawn with pawn takes, then I can play knight to d4, and I should be okay. The problem is if I play c takes d5, he can play queen a5 check, and now my knight's hanging because it's not guarded by the pawn. So c takes d5, queen a5 check looks very, very bad for white. So I don't think that Giri is going to play c takes d5. On the other hand, if he plays knight takes d4, then black might be able to try to get away with grabbing that pawn on d takes c4, hitting the knight on d4 a third time with the queen, and winning that pawn. So if I was in a game here, I would take a bunch of time and try to figure this out if I didn't already know what to do. But I suspect that Wang Hao already knows what to do here. Let's see what he played. But now we're using our analytical skills, and we're trying to analyze the position and then evaluate it. And the time management is, if you know what you're doing and you know what the move is, well, that's knowledge. You could just play it fast. And if you don't know what you're doing, this is getting fairly critical. It could be really easy for white to lose the game if he plays a fast move like pawn takes pawn and allows queen a5 check. And he plays pawn takes pawn. Well, shows you what I know. So now the question is, why isn't queen a5 check winning? Well, I guess because if white gets out of check and black takes the knight, then white has time to take the knight also. But it's pretty complicated. So Wang Hao played that pretty quickly, so it's probably a book line. They've probably studied this with the computer. Black says, I'm not going to check, I'll just take the pawn. And now maybe white could just castle to stop all the funny business, and then on the next move, take that pawn. Let's see what white does. He does castle. Okay, that makes sense. All right, and now black's going to finish his development somehow. He's going to play bishop f5, or knight f6, or knight e7, knight f6, and now white's going to go, okay, I'm going to get my pawn back, and now we have evaluation skills. Let's see what he did. Did he take it? No, he played there first, giving him a little wink toward the c7 square. Black, of course, castles, so that knight c7 is no longer a fork. A lot of people here would play knight c7, but after rook to b8, if you discover things with the knight to the wrong square, then you're winning a rook for 2 pieces. So, for instance, knight c7, rook b8, knight takes d5 is silly. Black would just play something like knight takes d5, bishop takes b8, knight takes, and just like in that Gioco Piano we did earlier in the video, black has 2 pieces for the rook, and I'm sure Stockfish is going to tell us that this is way, way better for black. Stockfish, what's the evaluation here? Yeah, black's up 2.5, so if you think, oh man, I could win that rook with a discovery, that's not such a great idea here. All right, so going back, so now we see the evaluation skills coming in. So white's not going to do that. At some point, he's just going to take the pawn and say, good, you have an isolated pawn. My evaluation says I'm slightly better. He plays queen c1 and hits the pawn on h6. Now black has to decide how he wants to save that pawn. He can save it by guarding it with king to h7. He could save it by guarding it with knight to g4. He could save it by moving it up to h5. And, you know, whenever you have all these opportunities to figure out how to save something, you don't just pick one. You try to analyze each one and see which one is the best one. Now, Giri has been moving almost instantly. It's hard to believe that he's still in his book, even in this move, but let's see how much time he takes. But you don't want to instantly play a move. You want to look at the different ways of doing it and see what the pros and cons are. And he plays a6. And of course, we have to see if we can just take that pawn. Does he have a discovery on my knight? I don't think so. So he does take the pawn. And black takes back. Now look at the time here. Now this could be the real time, or it could just be a relay issue. But when black played a6 here, he had 100 minutes left in the game. And after that move, assuming that the relay wasn't faulty, he has 52 minutes. So that was his first move out of book on here on move 12. And all of a sudden, he took almost half his time just to see what was going to be played. Now, I have a strong feeling that maybe part of that is relay delay, and that he really didn't take all that time. And later on, they'll fix the clocks when they get a relay of the right clock time. But there's no doubt that at that point, Geary's really started to slow down. All right, so Geary takes the pawn. Let's see how... Geary hits the knight, and Wang Hao takes the pawn. And black takes there, white takes, and now again, black needs to figure out, does he want to guard the pawn, or does he want to get a discovered attack? Maybe he could play knight h5, hitting the bishop and getting a discovered attack on the knight. He just guards the pawn with the king. Okay, white needs to now get his rooks into the game. This is my knowledge skill. My knowledge is you have to use all your pieces all the time. And my knight over here is a little bit vulnerable, so maybe playing this rook to d1 makes sense. Later on, I'll move the queen out of the way and put the other rook on the open file. So we're combining analytical skills with evaluation with a little bit of knowledge. I'm definitely never seen this position in my life before unless I saw this game. Rook to d1. Not surprising. You've got to get all your pieces in the game. Now he's got a rook over here he's got to get in the game. And black has to get these pieces in the game. All right, well, you get the idea of what's going on here. We don't need to play out the whole game. But at this point, we're pretty much out of our knowledge. There's a little bit of knowledge involved, like you got to use all your pieces. But most of it is to analyze the position and evaluate and say, boy, if I do this, how good is it? If I do that, how good is it? And take your time on every move. If you're not going to take your time and try to use your whole time during the game, you're going to have a tough time when you start playing better people if you get a little better. And they are taking all their time. It's like you're giving them a big handicap. I see so many people, especially those who learn how to play, during the pandemic, that just play online. They play a lot of 10 and 15-minute games. And, when they watch a game like this where grandmasters are taking lots of time on a move, they just wouldn't know how to do it. They wouldn't know how to think. They haven't really played slow chess and learned how to think. But, learning how to think, learning how to analyze, learning how to evaluate. I have videos on all those things in my video series here on YouTube. But, you want to slowly work on those things and get better. Do you want to still improve your knowledge? Absolutely. All right, so I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see who won the game, we can go through it really fast. Okay, there we go, really fast. And we could even have Stockfish tell us who's winning. Stockfish, what's going on over here? We can have the evaluation running in the background. The evaluation is this number in parentheses. It says that white's ahead by about a third of a pawn here. And we trade a bunch of things off. Black still has the isolated pawn. They trade a few things. Now it says white's lead has gotten up to 0.8. White's trying to guard the pawn. They trade things off. Looks like white won the b pawn. Now he's up by 1.6. Now Gary's in some trouble. Gary's trying to save the game. White's still up by about 1.4. Black's trying to get rid of some of the material on the board. Oh, white just made a mistake. His lead dropped to 0.3. And looks like black's going to get his draw, and he does. So Geary messed up. All right, so if you liked today's video, hit that like button. If you would like to subscribe, you can subscribe. But more important than anything is, please tell your friends about the channel. We've got almost 200 videos now on how to get better at chess, and this is certainly one of them. Talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.